Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. I want to go ahead and talk a little bit of college hoops. And I know I've said it a lot the last couple weeks, but if you're just kind of a casual college hoops fan, you like your team, you follow your team, whatever, it's a little bit of a quieter time on the calendar, maybe frankly the quietest time on the calendar. No games for another 45 days or so. You're not going to see your team run out of the tunnel here till early November. Same time, though, if you're a diehard, and I've said this a lot the last few weeks, this is actually a very important time on the calendar. September is a big recruiting month. Coaches can go on the road, evaluate players in person. At the same time, players are taking their visits, their 2, 3, 4, 5 official visits to really get a feel for who these schools are, who these coaches are, etc. And we've done a little bit of recruiting on the channel here the last couple days. About a week or so ago, we did kind of a wide, all-encompassing view of where recruiting is for 4, 5, 6 different players. But today, and 4, 5, 6 different programs for that matter as well. But today, I do want to focus on one team and one program, and that's the University of Kentucky. The reason why, it is pretty straightforward. It is pretty simple, okay? So Mark Pope, already to his credit, has 2 big-time players committed for the class of 2025. We've talked about them. Malachi Moreno, 7-footer from the state of Kentucky. He's phenomenal. And then Jasper Johnson, 6'4" guard, originally from Kentucky. I went to Link Academy last year. He's at Overtime Elite. But the bottom line is he's a 5-star, originally from Kentucky. And Mark Pope, to his credit, 2 elite players from within the state. He locked him down early. It's done. And now they're kind of helping him recruit for the rest of the class of 2025. Bring it up because in the last couple days, there have been some interesting developments. And you really got to pay attention to not only what's going on in recruiting, but frankly, you got to dive deep into the social media streets. You got to dive deep into the mentions and the comments and the whatever. But if you're paying close attention, it does feel like there is the possibility that there are 2 more prospects out there that could be on the verge of committing to Kentucky. Maybe not this second, but here in the next couple weeks or months. And if so, we got a potential package deal that could put Kentucky not only with the #1 recruiting class in the country, but it could be a little bit of a nice little historic run here for Mark Pope over the next couple weeks. So let's go ahead and dive in. We know about the 2 players that are already committed, Jasper Johnson, Malachi Moreno. We just talked about them. But let's start with something that really kind of started about a week or so ago, and that is that Caleb Wilson, 5-star wing, visited the University of Kentucky last weekend, okay? So we've talked a lot about Caleb Wilson on this channel over the last couple months. Interesting recruitment, was really good as a sophomore, struggled a little bit as a junior. It's okay. Nobody's perfect. Yeah, you have ups and downs like everything else. And then really, I thought had a phenomenal summer, played with the Knight Riders program, which was, of course, where the Boozers play, Cam and Caden Boozer. Cam Boozer is, just maybe the best player in the country, right up there with AJ DeBance, okay? So I bring it up because Caleb Wilson, it had been kind of an interesting couple months for him, a positive couple months after the AAU season, but his recruitment, you just really couldn't get a feel for who stood where. I remember even doing the, projecting where all the 5-stars will commit. We did that in the summertime. And I remember Caleb Wilson, it was about as foggy on him as any recruit in that top 15 to 20, as it just felt like there was no real leader. You couldn't even get a sense for who was really in the mix. Well, I bring it up because he went to visit Kentucky last weekend. And while he has other visits planned, we will get to that in a minute. This thing went about as well as it possibly could have, okay? Because the bottom line is, and by the way, speaking of the bottom line, you see right there, make sure you're following our Torres on UK account on Twitter for all your late breaking Kentucky news. But at the same time, the bottom line was this thing went so well. This is how you know a visit goes well. This kid, Caleb Wilson, comes back and immediately starts talking to reporters and saying that he is going to move up his recruiting timeline and could commit as early as late November, early December, which would allow him to sign in the early signing period. Doesn't mean Kentucky's a done deal. But when you start taking a visit and then immediately moving up your timeline, yeah, that's a great sign for Kentucky. At the same time, though, and this is where you kind of got to finagle and maneuver on social media. As soon as the Caleb Wilson kind of buzz started picking up, you know what else started happening? Some interesting stuff on social media. By the way, wish producer Matt was here. He has the day off. Friday is his day off. But I only bring it up because I wish I could have had him pull all the tweets and Instagram posts or whatever. But here is what happened, and maybe it means nothing. But as soon as Caleb Wilson comes back, obviously like any elite recruit, what does he do? He posts pictures from all of his trips, okay? And so he posts a picture from Kentucky, or a couple pictures. And who just so happens to hop in the mentions of his of his posts, other than a 4-star guard named Caden Lewis, a top 35 prospect from the DC area, lefty, really good player. Caden Lewis hops in, says, man, I want to play with this guy, okay? And then immediately after that, how about this? Caden Lewis then cuts his list to 4. It is UConn, it is Duke, it is Carolina, and it is Kentucky. And in the process of cutting his list down to 4, Caleb Wilson then hops in his mentions and says, quote, come on over, bro. Don't think he's inviting him over to play Xbox or NCAA 24 college football. That is a sign that those two appear to want to play together. And then on top of everything else, how about Jasper Johnson, who is committed to Kentucky, getting into the mix himself, going back to Caleb Wilson saying, come on, Caleb. This is on Twitter. We missed you in AAU. Let's go crazy in front of the best fans in the country. BBN, Kentucky till I die. That is, of course, what he said when he committed to Kentucky. So again, I apologize. We have no visuals, but for those keeping score at home, Caleb Wilson visits, immediately cuts his list. Oh, by the way, then he posts pictures. Caden Lewis, a 4-star guard, gets in his mentions. Jasper Johnson gets in his mentions. And then Caden Lewis cuts down his list himself. And Caleb Wilson jumps in those mentions and says, come on over, bro. Maybe it means nothing, but I think Kentucky is in great shape for these two uncommitted players on top of the players that they already have committed. In terms of timelines, everything, a couple interesting things. First of all, with Caleb Wilson, back to him for a second. I know we haven't talked to Caden Lewis. We'll get to him in a minute. With Caleb Wilson, it's going to be interesting because he does ultimately have a couple other visits set up. He is set to go to Central Florida this weekend, next weekend, Central Florida, UCF, the Golden Knights. Beyond that, he was supposed to visit Bama a few weeks ago. That has been scheduled for the first weekend in October. We'll see if that holds up. Not saying he won't visit, but was supposed to visit a few weeks ago, whatever. And there may even be a late October visit to Auburn in the process as well. Same time, though, like I said, was supposed to visit Bama, doesn't. Visits Kentucky, immediately moves up his commitment date. That is a great sign for Kentucky. In terms of Caden Lewis, now this one is interesting. So he is a 4-star guard from DC, really talented player, lead guard, can get his own shot, can get others involved, whatever. What's interesting about Caden Lewis is that he is, and I'm not being facetious when I say this, quite literally, unless something has changed in the last couple hours or so when he missed a flight or something, he is quite literally on a visit to UConn right now as we speak, okay? So he has a Final Four of UConn, of Duke, of Kentucky, and of North Carolina. And what I would say is a couple things. One, UConn has turned up the heat on this kid, okay? He is from the DC area. I don't know if we talked about this on the show last week, but, you talk about UConn pulling a power move. They were in DC last week for a little thing called meeting the president at the White House. Remember, the White House always welcomes in the national champions of the previous season. So UConn visits the White House to meet the president. And this is not a political thing. I'm not talking about the president here. But then after the White House, immediately goes and visits 2 recruits in the DC area. One, Eric Ryby, is kind of considering Kansas, Creighton, and UConn. The other one, Caden Lewis. So you talk about a power move, showing up in the same suit you just came from the White House to celebrate your second straight national championship. So that is where UConn stood. Caden Lewis is visiting UConn, and it's worth noting. Still has Duke on the list, still has Carolina on the list. He's supposed to visit Carolina next weekend as well. terms of his recruitment, I thought early on, I think UConn felt like they were in pretty good shape. But I'll tell you, even talking to some people kind of in the UConn sphere, I think they feel like maybe this isn't as solid as we thought. Now, to UConn's credit, they're recruiting other players as well. Darius Adams, a 5-star. Braylon Mullins isn't really, a point guard in the way that a Caden Lewis is. In theory, you could take both. But the bottom line is, I think UConn probably felt maybe a little bit better about a Caden Lewis before than they do now. And I talked to somebody that's pretty plugged in that recruitment. Even though a Caden Lewis hasn't taken an official visit yet to Kentucky, there's some people that think that Kentucky might actually be the leader, which is crazy because, again, he's on a visit to UConn right now. He's supposed to go to Carolina. Duke speaks for itself. And Caden Lewis, of course, is set to visit Kentucky. Has not yet set a visit to Kentucky. So we will see what happens. It all feels, a little bit internet-y, hype, whatever. But I will also say I am not putting it past Mark Pope to get this done. First of all, the staff he has put together is amazing. We talked about it. Alvin Brooks III, Jason Hart, who, of course, Jason Hart was a West Coast guy. I knew him when he was at USC. He is a bulldog of a recruiter. But at the same time, I think the big part is you got those first two cornerstone pieces set for this recruiting class. Remember, you already have the 2 5-stars in Moreno and Jasper Johnson committed for this class. That to me matters. Good players want to play with other good players. You don't have to be the first guy to go out on a limb and commit to Mark Pope when nobody else has. The other thing that I think is important with Kentucky, and I was talking to somebody about this from the UConn side the other day, Kentucky's going to have a ton of playing time in the 25-26 season. So the freshman year of all these players. Remember, Kentucky has 7 right now, 7 players who are entering their 5th year of college basketball that are out of eligibility after this year. So forget the possibility of, could this guy transfer? What about that guy? What about this? What about that? No. They know for a fact they have 7 dudes that are not going to be able to come back in 25-26, even if they want to. The point I'm trying to make, there is a lot of opportunity coming at Kentucky. So we'll see what happens. Caleb Wilson, to me, feels maybe a little bit more imminent, even though a Caden Lewis kind of cut his list. But I just sit there and say, man, if you're a Kentucky fan, I don't know how you can't feel good about this situation. And we will monitor. Obviously, if there's any news out of the Caden Lewis visit to UConn, we will discuss it next week. But man, oh man, how fascinating is it that Mark Pope is making moves? By the way, speaking of which, if you have not gotten your Hope in Pope t-shirt, as you can see, AaronTorresOnline.com/merchandise, AaronTorresOnline.com/merchandise. Grab your Hope in Pope shirt. It is an exciting time for UK fans. And we'll see, can this package deal come together for the Kentucky Wildcats? 2 in the books with Moreno and Jasper Johnson. We'll see if they can get a Caden Lewis. And, of course, on top of that, Caleb Wilson.